Committee will come to order. Good morning. I'd like to begin this hearing by stating the Oversight Committee mission statement. We exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have the right to know that the money Washington takes for them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers because taxpayers have a right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. Good morning, and I thank everybody for coming to attend this hearing, which is entitled Border Security Oversight, Identifying and Responding to the Current Threats. I'd also like to thank my colleagues who are here and the people in the audience for joining us today. Much of the current immigration reform debate has centered on the importance of border security, but the conversation is not focused enough on how to secure the border in the most effective manner. As a result, today's hearing will examine a variety of threats to the U.S. border security, from illegal entrants to drug trafficking organizations to potential national security breaches. This hearing will also examine how to measure each of these risks and the most effective responses to the threats we confront. The Department of Homeland Security is responsible for controlling and guarding the borders of the United States. The Department's operational responsibility include, quote, preventing and investigating illegal movement across our borders, including the smuggling of people, drugs, cash, and weapons, end quote. The Secure Fence Act of 2006, which intended to, quote, to establish operational control over the international land and maritime borders of the United States, end quote, authorizes the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security to take necessary and appropriate actions to secure the U.S. borders. From 2006 to 2012, the security measures implemented to help achieve operational control of U.S. borders have cost the U.S. taxpayers approximately $75 billion. Despite spending tens of billions of taxpayer dollars to secure the border, the Government Accountability Office reported in 2011 that there were only 129 miles of the 1,954-mile-long southwest border, or roughly 6% of the border, where Border Patrol can actually, quote, deter or detect and apprehend illegal entries, end quote, at the border itself. 6% operational control. The lack of operational control documented by GAO directly contradicts statements made by the Administration that the border is the most secure that it has ever been. After GAO reported low levels of operational control, DHS changed its policy to make the number of, quote unquote, apprehensions the measure of effectiveness. However, the number of apprehensions which DHS uses as its metric now does not indicate whether Federal Government efforts to secure the border are actually achieving operational control or not. One of the fundamental questions I have is, if the rise in apprehensions is increasing, does that mean the border is more secure, or does that mean the border is less secure? If the number of apprehensions is declining, does that mean the border is less secure, or does that mean the border is more secure? I asked the Attorney General this question. Attorney General Holder said, you cannot draw a conclusion based solely on apprehensions. I've asked the Secretary of Homeland Security, who didn't really give a thorough answer to that question. It's something we need to explore, not to play gotcha, but to try to come up with a metric that we can all live with. And when those metrics change, you can't compare them to past performance. And that's something we need to explore. Since the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, the Committee's oversight efforts have examined the effective use of taxpayer dollars at the border. While the Department is working hard to secure the border, there are examples of wasteful spending. For instance, SBI Net, which was intended to improve video surveillance of the border, has costed taxpayers roughly $1.2 billion. But SBI Net has been deemed a failure. On April 2nd to the 4th of this year, members and staff of the House Oversight Government Reform Committee, including myself, traveled to Yuma, NACO, Nogales, Arizona, to assess the Federal Government's most recent effort to secure the border. I appreciate the men and women that we interacted with there. We had a very productive trip. The committee also visited the Eloy Detention Facility in Arizona. It was briefed by prison and ICE officials. The committee learned that the individuals classified as OTMs. How the Department classifies people, OTM stands for Other Than Mexicans, accounted for roughly 900 inmates from 60 different countries out of approximately 1,500 in the Eloy detention facility. In other words, more than half of the people at the detention facility were not Mexicans. They were from 60 different countries. For those that assume that the border problem is simply a problem with Mexico, that's just not true. There's nothing statistical that would support that. And certainly if you look at the detentions, it is a much bigger and broader problem than just people coming north from Mexico. It is a bigger, broader problem. Based on our conversations with CBP officers in Yuma and Nogales and other cities, there appears to be an increasing trend of OTMs moving across the southwest border. A significant portion of OTMs are coming from Latin America, including Guatemala and Honduras, in addition to India and China and other parts in Europe and Asia and other countries. Border Patrol officers on the ground also told the committee about potential problems to our immigration system. For instance, it appears the judicial process for asylum requests and the government's issuance and administration of B-1 and B-2 visas may contain some very serious flaws. During our trip to the border, we also found that the government continues to identify new and emerging threats to secure the border, including the drug cartel's use of semi-submersible vessels and ultralight aircraft and their construction of underground tunnels. Even right in the heart of Nogales, they still recently found another tunnel going right into the heart of the city. Today, we hope not only to discuss these threats, but also responses to some of these risks, including the use of effective drones, strategic placement of troops and others, technology which can successfully be implemented along the border. Whether through technology or Border Patrol agents, we must allocate the necessary resources to secure the border, but in a way that is smart, strategic, and ensures that we do not waste taxpayer dollars. I want to emphasize, and I commend the work and support of our law enforcement officers from the various different agencies. They do amazing work in exceptionally difficult conditions. We cannot thank them enough for their good, hard, diligent work. It is tough, tough work. Today's discussion should focus on understanding the threats to our borders and how we should respond to each of the challenges. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses for a productive conversation about securing the borders of the United States. However, I am disappointed that Joseph Langlois, the Associate Director for Refugee Asylum and International Operations with the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, has refused to testify before this subcommittee today. The committee requested his attendance and participation in the hearing 13 days ago, on June 4th, 2013. June 14th of this year. Despite providing essentially a two-week notice to testify before the subcommittee, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services has declined to appear, asserting, quote, "Due to the lack of sufficient notice to prepare and clear testimony, as well as prepare a suitable witness, USCIS will be unable to appear at the upcoming June 27th hearing on border security." I want to thank the 4 other people from the other agencies who were able to prepare, who did come and were briefed, and who are joining us today. I find it totally unacceptable that with 13 days' notice, that is not sufficient time to prepare to testify in Congress about what you do every day and the job and responsibility that you have for your own department and agency. So I thank those that are here. We duly note the person who is not here and find that unacceptable. The American taxpayers deserve answers to these important questions before this subcommittee today. We have left the seat open, hoping that the witness would appear today, but it appears as if he's not. Again, thank you for the agencies that are here today. I also want to thank and commend my colleague Trey Gowdy for his work. He is the chairman of Judiciary of the subcommittee that's dealing with immigration. As we move forward in dealing with the problem that is immigration from a legislative standpoint, it is critical that we get the border security portion right. Every bit of legislation, whether it's in the Senate or the House, has always focused on how are we going to secure the border? How do we assure the American people that the border is secure? There has been legislation that was passed in 2006 that dealt with supposedly securing the border and the fence, yet only 6% operational control. Earlier, we passed legislation that would ensure a viable entry-exit system. We have none. That's a problem. We need to discuss that today. So I look forward to the Congress tackling immigration reform. It is much needed. We need to understand what's happening at the border, and we appreciate those that are here today. I guess we'll just keep going. Okay. Does anybody have an opening statement that they would like to make? Members from the dais? Members may have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record, but we'll now recognize our first panel. Mr. Michael Fisher is the Chief of the U.S. Border Patrol. Mr. David Murphy is the Assistant Commissioner for Customs and Border Patrol, Office of Field Operations. Mr. Thomas Homan, did I say that properly? Is the Executive Associate Director of ICE Enforcement and Removal Operations. And Rebecca Gambler is the Director for Homeland Security and Justice at the Government Accountability Office. Again, we thank you all for being here today. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn before they testify. If you would please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect the witnesses answered in the affirmative. You may be seated. In order to allow time for discussion, please limit your testimony, if you would, to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be part of the record. We'll give you some latitude. But again, I want to thank you for being here, and we'll recognize Mr. Fisher first.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Tierney, and other distinguished members of the subcommittee, it is indeed an honor and a privilege to be before you today to discuss the identification and the response to current threats. As CBP prepares for our 2014 operations, the U.S. Border Patrol continues to be guided by the 3 pillars of our strategy: information, integration, and rapid response. Current intelligence estimates suggest that transnational criminal organizations and the networks that support them continue to exploit the border in Arizona and South Texas. For the first time in over a decade, illegal cross-border activity is more prevalent in South Texas than in any other corridor along the southwest border. Today, activity in South Texas accounts for approximately 34% of all arrests along the southwest border. It is also noteworthy to recognize, as the Chairman pointed out, that 60% of these arrests are from nationals from some other country than Mexico. In particular, the top 3 sending countries are Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. However, the current activity in South Texas needs to be put in proper context. Even with elevated activity in Rio Grande Valley, the daily apprehension rate is approximately 40% less than what it was in 1997. We continue to mature our integrated operations in each corridor with our federal, state, local, and tribal partners. Protecting the citizens against those that would do us harm does not begin nor end at the border, and we cannot achieve border security alone. As the incremental transition of activity shifted to South Texas, we took the following actions. We directed most Border Patrol Academy classes and those agents to South Texas, increasing the overall agent boots on the ground in high-risk areas such as Rio Grande Valley. We redeployed approximately 100 pieces of technology to South Texas from other southwest border sectors. These were equipment such as unattended ground sensors, mobile surveillance systems, and thermal imaging systems. And as you may recall, we entered into a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Defense to allow the transfer of detection and monitoring equipment from the military to CBP. With the drawdown of forces in theater, we sought to capitalize on the opportunity to reuse equipment that the taxpayers already paid for to assist frontline agents. Accordingly, we recently delivered the first installment of this equipment to the field. There are 224 detection and monitoring systems that have been inventoried and sent to the southwest border, 75% of which went to South Texas. In March of this year, we initiated vulnerability assessment flights along the southwest border utilizing CBP's Predator Bs, equipped with synthetic aperture radar for broader situational awareness. To date, we have developed more than 80 target folders covering approximately 320 non-contiguous miles. In support of this effort, we continue to leverage geospatial intelligence collection to augment our own organic capabilities. In conclusion, My team has designed and implemented a formidable strategy, and we continue to learn and adjust our tactics, techniques, and procedures as conditions on the ground dictate. I stand by my convictions that given the operational flexibility to match capability to threat, we will reduce the likelihood of attack against the nation and continue to provide the requisite safety and security to the citizens who deserve no less. Mr. Chairman, again, thank you for the opportunity to testify today, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Fisher. We will now recognize Mr. Murphy for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Vice Chairman Loomis, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. I appreciate the committee's leadership and commitment to ensuring the security of the American people and look forward to discussing the progress that we've made in securing the border. We define a secure border at our nation's ports of entry as a well-managed border, where mission risks are effectively identified and addressed, and legitimate trade and travel are expedited. Every day, we carry out our mission to protect the people and the economy of the United States by preventing dangerous people and goods from entering the country, while expediting legitimate trade and travel that is the lifeblood of our economy at 329 ports of entry. Traffic at our ports of entry differs by environment, which encompasses air, land, and sea, type, traveler or cargo, and mode of transportation, commercial or general aviation, personally owned vehicles, pedestrians, trucks, containerized, packaged, or bulk. In each of these environments and each activity presents a different set of challenges with respect to threats, volume, and timing of processing. Last year, CBP welcomed more than 350 million passengers and processed $2.3 trillion in total trade value. We are seeing volume increases in all environments and anticipate volume to continue as the economy recovers. One of the most substantial growths is in the air environment, where we've seen a volume increase of 12% since 2009. It is important to note that the vast majority of this traffic complies with all rules and regulations enforced by CBP. Our goal is to identify and interdict those few travelers and shipments that may present a risk, while facilitating the vast majority of legitimate traffic. We are working to find and stop the proverbial needles in the haystack while the haystack is moving. We continue to improve our ability to do this and to focus our finite resources on those people and goods that present the highest potential risk. In addition to refining our risk-based and layered approach to security, we have worked to extend our borders outward and to interdict threats before they reach the United States. DHS, in cooperation with our interagency and foreign partners, now screens people and goods earlier in the process, before boarding passengers or loading cargo onto planes or vessels destined to the United States. Since 2009, CBP has expanded its pre-departure screening efforts and now checks all air travelers against government databases on all flights arriving to and departing from the United States prior to boarding. CBP has also extended our nation's borders outwards in the cargo environment. All inbound cargo manifests are screened before they are laden onto vessels, with almost 85% of high-risk shipments examined or addressed before arrival at U.S. seaports. In addition to improving our ability to identify and mitigate potentially high-risk travel and trade, CBP remains focused on identifying ways to facilitate the growing volume of people and goods entering into the United States. We have seen a marked facilitation improvements through the development of a series of transformation initiatives that increase the speed of our processing, including the expansion of the Trusted Traveler and Trusted Trader programs, the elimination of paper forms, and the increased use of technology. We will continue to aggressively pursue these strategies, which both increase security and streamline the border process for people and goods. These types of programs and enhanced management tools have not only increased our ability to facilitate lawful travelers, but have also provided significant security benefits. For example, we've had limited the number of acceptable travel documents and increased our ability to identify at our land ports, resulting in a decreased use of fraudulent documents and attempts by inadmissible persons to enter through our ports. As we refine our targeting and interdiction efforts along the southwest border, transnational criminal organizations have begun to use unique and non-traditional deep concealment smuggling methods using smaller loads to thwart detection. Ever-improving interdiction efforts by CBP continue to force these organizations to attempt a myriad of more costly and often less successful smuggling techniques. In 2009 and 2010, we focused our agricultural protection efforts on increasing interception of our highest agricultural risk pests, Asian gypsy moths and capra beetles. These pests that, if left undetected, could result in millions of dollars in economic damage. In the year following this nationwide training, we saw record levels of interceptions and continue to maintain those levels of interceptions today. The state of border security continues to improve at our ports of entry. We have made tremendous progress and are well postured against terrorist threats, having pushed our security measures beyond our immediate borders. And we are pushing a robust strategy to optimize our current business practices. In short, we have maintained and increased our mission effectiveness while facing increasing demands for growing passenger and trade volume, and we continue to seek ways to improve. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Tierney, Vice Chairman Loomis, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. We now recognize Mr. Homan for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Tierney, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. On behalf of Secretary Napolitano and Director Morton, thank you for the opportunity to appear here today to discuss the significant progress ICE and DHS have made to secure our border. As you may know, ICE is the principal investigative agency within DHS and the second largest in the Federal Government. The men and women at ICE play a critical role in securing the border and carrying out smart and effective immigration enforcement policies. ICE consists of 3 operational programs: Enforcement and Removal Operations, ERO, Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, and the Office of the Principal Legal Advisor, OPLA. HSI investigates a wide range of crimes that arise from illegal movement of people and goods into, within, and out of the United States. I'm the head of ERO. In this role, I lead a program that identifies, apprehends, detains, and removes aliens subject to removal from the United States, pursuant to ICE's prioritized enforcement principles. I have been a Federal law enforcement officer for 29 years, 27 of which have been spent in immigration enforcement. Over the years, I have seen and worked the entire life cycle of immigration enforcement. I have served on the front line as a Border Patrol agent. I tackled smuggling organizations as a special agent with a former INS, and now focus on smart enforcement at the back end of the process, that being removal of aliens from the United States. Over the past 4 years, ICE has focused its resources on removals of individuals who fit within our enforcement priorities. Those priorities include people who are threats to national security and public safety, such as convicted criminals, recent illegal border crossers, and those who obstruct immigration controls. This focus had led to unprecedented successes. Last year, ICE removed almost 410,000 aliens. Some 55% of them had criminal conviction. This is almost double the number of criminal alien removals in 2008. And 96% of those aliens fit within the priority categories I mentioned above. Simply put, our reforms and priorities have made our communities safer. ICE carefully manages its detention population in our field offices on the border and nationwide. Operational needs on the southwest border can change quickly, and ICE has a policy and infrastructure in place to meet those needs. The successes I mentioned today could not have been achieved without the implementation of smart, effective, and efficient policies issued by Secretary Napolitano and Director Morton. Of course, we must work closely with our DHS partners in order to meet our goals. For instance, 44% of ICE's detainee in ICE custody came from the CBP. Our joint efforts are critical to the nation's border enforcement efforts, and I am proud of the working relationship I have with my colleagues I'm testifying with today. Another part of our commitment to smart, effective immigration enforcement are the major reforms we have made to the detention system. All of our reforms help ensure that individuals in ICE's detained population are held appropriately and classified according to their risk. We have put in place strong safeguards against abuse and ensure our detainees have access to health care and legal resources. All of the successes I have outlined today have been the result of reasonable immigration policies and priorities. Even in this time of budget uncertainty, we are using our resources in a smart, effective, and responsible manner. We are making the public safer by targeting our resources where they are needed most. Thank you again for inviting me to testify. I'm pleased to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
efforts to secure the border. Since 2004, DHS has increased resources allocated to securing borders. For example, in fiscal year 2004, the Border Patrol had over 10,000 agents. In fiscal year 2011, there were over 21,000 agents. Similarly, the number of Customs and Border Protection officers stationed at ports of entry has increased from over 17,000 in fiscal year 2004 to more than 20,000 in fiscal year 2011. Further, DHS has deployed technology and infrastructure to border areas. Today, I will focus my remarks on three key areas in which GAO has assessed DHS's efforts to secure our nation's borders. First, I will highlight our work reviewing GAO's efforts to assess its border security activities. Second, I will discuss GAO's work reviewing interagency coordination efforts. And third, I will highlight GAO's work on DHS management of technology assets for securing the border. With regard to my first point, Border Patrol data show that from fiscal year 2006 to 2011, apprehensions within each southwest border sector declined. Border Patrol attributed this decrease to various factors such as changes in the U.S. economy and increases in resources. Fiscal year 2012 data reported by the Border Patrol indicate that apprehensions across the southwest border increased from fiscal year 2011, but it is too early to assess whether this increase indicates a change in trend. Further, from fiscal year 2006 through 2011, estimated known illegal entries in each southwest border sector also declined. In addition to data on apprehensions, other data collected by the Border Patrol are used by sector management to inform assessments of its efforts. These data include, among other things, the percentage of estimated known illegal entrants who were apprehended more than once, which is referred to as the recidivism rate, and contraband seizures. With regard to the recidivism rate, our analysis of Border Patrol data showed that the rate decreased across southwest border sectors between fiscal years 2008 and 2011. With regard to drug and other contraband seizures, the number of seizures increased by 83% from fiscal year 2006 to 2011. Since fiscal year 2011, DHS has used the number of apprehensions on the southwest border between ports of entry as an interim performance goal and measure for border security. This measure provides some useful information, but does not position the Department to be able to report on how effective its efforts are at securing the border, resulting in reduced oversight and DHS accountability. The Border Patrol is in the process of developing goals and measures. However, it has not set target timeframes for completing its efforts. We recommended that the Border Patrol establish such timeframes to help ensure that development of goals and measures are completed in a timely manner. The Department agreed with our recommendations and stated that such timeframes by November 2013. With regard to my second point, DHS and other agencies have reported improvements in interagency coordination of border enforcement operations. For example, Federal partners responsible for securing Federal lands along the borders have cited increased information sharing and communication. However, our work has also identified opportunities for improvements in more consistent implementation of existing interagency agreements and stronger oversight of interagency forums for border security. Finally, DHS has deployed technology, infrastructure, and other assets to U.S. borders. However, DHS has faced a number of challenges in effectively planning for and managing its technology programs and other assets. For example, our work has shown that DHS could better document the analysis it has used to determine the types, quantities, and locations of technology it plans to deploy to the southwest border under its new technology plan. Further, CBP has not yet defined performance metrics for assessing implementation of its new technology plan, hindering CBP's efforts to assess the effectiveness of the plan going forward. In closing, our work has identified opportunities for DHS to strengthen its border security programs and efforts. We have made a number of recommendations to the Department to address various challenges and to enhance management of border security-related programs. DHS has generally concurred with our recommendations and is taking action to address them. We will continue to monitor DHS's efforts in these areas. This concludes my prepared statement, and I would be pleased to answer any questions that members may have.
Thank you, and I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. Gambler, is it fair to say that there are no metrics to determine how secure or insecure the border is currently?
Currently, the Department is using the number of apprehensions on the southwest border between ports of entry as its goal and measure for border
But
security.
that's an incomplete metric. Would you agree with that?
That measure does not allow, position the Border Patrol and DHS to be able to assess the effectiveness of its efforts because it doesn't compare apprehensions to estimated entrants.
Thank you very much. Mr. Murphy, my understanding is we have no entry-exit system, particularly at the land-based ports, to gauge who's coming in and who's going out, correct?
Well, no, sir, I wouldn't say that's completely correct. I think we've made some significant improvements in sophistication and entrance. Obviously, that's been the focus. As far as the exit, we are working on that. That's a significant issue. We are well aware of it, and we're right now dedicating.
Do you have any statistics to show how many people actually leave the country?
No, sir. Right now, our outbound is.
My understanding is the majority of visas that this country offers are what are called B1, B2 entry exits. I sat and watched this. Thousands of people in Nogales and Yuma streamed into the country. In fiscal year 2011, my understanding is we approved through the State Department 4.3 million of these cards where people are supposed to be in the country temporarily, right?
Yes, sir.
How many people came into the country using a B1, B2 entry-exit card?
I don't have that number, sir, but I can definitely.
Is it something that the agency has?
Oh, yes. We track what comes in. It's what's going out that right now we need to get a better handle on.
When you say better handle, do you track any of them going out?
Well, right now, our outbound operations are basically geared towards intelligence, pulse and surge operations. And
That's not what I asked you.
I know, sir. No, we don't.
So we're letting millions of people, roughly almost a million a day, into the country. We have no idea how many are going out. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
This is current law, right? It is current law that we're supposed to have an entry-exit program. Why don't we have an exit program?
We're working on it, sir.
But look, you've been there for a while. How long have you worked in the agency?
29 years, sir.
Why don't we have an exit program? It's not good enough to just smile at me.
No, sir. I don't have a good answer for you. We know it's an issue.
Is it a funding issue? Is it a lack of commitment? Is there not available software? I mean, if you're telling me we're gauging when they come into the country, why aren't we gauging when they go out of the country?
Well, sir, I think it's a huge issue, and unfortunately, it's a costly issue too. I mean, we would have to replicate what we have coming into the country at ports of entry, almost at port of entry going out of the country, in order to probably get our arms around exactly that issue.
You know, we're told that 40% of the people that are here illegally came here legally. When we don't have a viable exit system, and there are no metrics, there's no information, there's not even an attempt to try to gather some names, I'm really concerned about this entry-exit program. I'm really concerned about the B1, B2 visas. I think it's the untold story of the immigration problem and mess that we have. When the majority of the visas given out to this country are given via the B1, B2 entry-exit, the majority, 4.3 million we gave out in fiscal year 2011, they're only supposed to go, what's the rules, right? You're only supposed to go into the country a certain 10 miles or something with an entry-exit card, correct?
I think it's 25, and then we've just increased that recently.
Why? Why did we increase? We increased it to what?
I believe in New Mexico it's 55 miles.
Okay, so you're only supposed to, in certain parts of the country, you're only supposed to go 10 miles, right? Some to 25, and now you're saying, but in parts of New Mexico, you can go 55 miles. Do we do any monitoring of that?
No, sir.
So we gauge, there's no monitoring, we just do it on your word, we give millions of these out there. Do you know how many, we issued 4.3 million entry-exit cards in 2011. How many cards are out there? Like when you get a card, how long is that good for? Is it valid for just a year, or is it valid forever? What, do you know?
I don't know offhand. I do know that they put a date on how long it's valid for, yes, sir.
Okay, so there are millions of these cards out there. They're supposed to, it's just the honor system right now, right? You're just supposed to come back. but you aren't gauging even a single person as to whether or not they're returning.
We're not capturing that right now.
All right, my time has expired. Now recognize the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Loomis, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to also thank the gentleman and the lady for being here today. My questions are going to concentrate on fence as a mechanism to stop transland crossings. Have we, this is to any of you, has the fence between California and Mexico improved the crossing of non-documented workers and illegals? Mr. Fisher, you're nodding your head.
Yes, Congresswoman, the fence, and in particular, you mentioned San Diego, has had an impact in reducing the flow of people into the United States in those areas where we do have fence.
Okay, how much of the fence is completed on the Arizona-Mexico border?
In total, there's about 652 miles across the southwest border that has been complete. Some of that is pedestrian fence, and some of that is vehicle barriers. I'm not really sure specifically in Arizona how much of that. Arizona, as you know, has about 260 miles of border. Within those urban areas in Douglas and Naco and Nogales, out to both the east and west flanks of the ports of entry, that has been extended a significant number of miles.
Do you believe that completing a fence on the border between Mexico and Arizona would be beneficial to preventing the flow of people and narcotics across the border?
I do in some locations.
And what locations would those be, specifically along the Arizona-Mexico border?
It would be in those areas where the networks and the criminal organizations like to exploit the legitimate infrastructure that exists. So
And what kind of legitimate, such as, what is legitimate infrastructure?
Certainly. If you think of the smuggling organizations much like a business, they're trying to move the commodity, whether that's people, whether that's narcotics, through the borders and out of the border areas. So the infrastructure that requires them to do that is road systems, it's airports, it's bus stations, and all that legitimate infrastructure that supports the communities within those border areas.
What about wilderness areas where we don't have fences, where you've been restricted by other U.S. agencies from using motorized vehicles on wilderness areas, and the offending parties are using vehicles, making it difficult for you to apprehend them? Is that problematic?
In some areas, I wouldn't qualify it as problematic. There are areas, as you mentioned, public lands in Arizona, which prohibit, in most situations on a steady state deployment, motorized vehicles. But we do have and entered into an agreement with the Department of the Interior and Fish and Wildlife to be able to go onto those areas based on intelligence if we know that there is activity. So we are allowed onto those areas to basically track individuals that come across.
So you have to get agreements with another federal agency to gain access to federal land on our side of the border?
No, the agreement has already been set. In other words, the memorandum of understanding allows us to go onto those lands. And remember, some of that private or that public land is protected under the environmental laws. It doesn't preclude us from going on there. It's just we have the agreement that we're allowed to go in when we are actually working the border.
Okay, so you can pursue someone.
Yes, we can.
But can you protect the border? Can you patrol the border?
In some areas, most areas we can. That's
with
correct.
vehicles?
Yes, we do it with vehicles. We do it with horseback. A lot of the detection is made from the air also. The
Tucson border has been an area where we've seen significant crossings.
That's correct.
Is that now the second most prevalent area to cross?
It is, well, in terms of apprehensions, right now it is second only to Rio Grande Valley in the South Texas area.
So it continues to be a major source of crossings.
Yes.
What would be your recommended best deterrent to illegal crossings in that area, in Mexico, Mexico and Arizona?
Certainly. Well, I think there's a couple of things. I wouldn't invest on one thing in particular. One is the investment in additional technology, detecting and monitoring.
You know, we've
borders.
seen some technology reports that some of the technology has failed and was expensive, and its failure has not necessarily been corrected. How's that going?
Are you
The
referring-
SBI net. What is the department's plan to improve that technology, the border radar system?
About 3 years ago, when the SBI was being assessed, the Secretary Napolitano asked CBP, and in particular the Border Patrol, to make an assessment on whether we should continue exploring that type of technology and the integrated technology that SBI had planned to
$1.2 billion, as I understand, has been spent on that?
That sounds about right, yes, ma'am.
And you're assessing now whether that is going forward in a productive way?
We made that assessment, and our recommendation to the Secretary, which she agreed to, was to invest more in the mobile technology and not to invest in things like SBI Net, which were more static.
My time has expired. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher, will you please provide to this committee the interagency working agreements on your ability to patrol and pursue potentially people that are here illegally on public lands that are designated wilderness or similar, wilderness study areas, those types of things? Oregon Pipe, for instance, would be an area. Is that something you can provide to this committee?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
How long would it take to get that to us?
I'll take that back as an action item right after the hearing, sir.
When's a reasonable time where I should get upset that you haven't provided them to me?
Far be it from me, sir, to
Yes, you're in charge here, so you make a decision. What's the date? All right, July 3rd. Is that fair?
You read my mind, sir.
Thank you. Look forward to July of this year. Thank you. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Duncan, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chief Fisher, just out of curiosity, can you give me a rough number of how large or how many Border Patrol agents there were when you started with the agency 26 years ago?
There was less than 3,000, sir.
Less than 3,000?
Yes, sir.
The reason I ask that, I remember we gave big increases in funding for border control in the 90s, and then now, of course, we've heard Ms. Gambler say that since 2004 we've gone from 10,000 agents to 21,000, I think it was, and of course now the Senate has passed an amendment saying that we're supposed to double that again, and frankly, I know you can never satisfy any government agency's appetite for money or land, but I'm really skeptical as to whether we can efficiently, effectively spend all the money that we're throwing at this effort and increase the number of agents that much, that quickly. What do you say about that, Commissioner Murphy? How big was Customs when you started 29 years ago?
Sir, to be honest with you, I don't even know what that number is.
Yes.
But obviously, as you indicate, there's, significant work to be done, and but it's the determination of the right number. I mean, that's obviously something that I think is going to have to be decided.
Well, isn't the number coming across in large part determined by the economy and so the economy in Mexico and the economy here? Because I read that during our downturn that the numbers coming across greatly decreased, and there were more people, or a lot of people who had come here illegally were going back to Mexico or other countries. Is that true?
Well, sir, as you may be aware, one thing that we've done to try to transform the way we look at the border and the way we look at the numbers that we need, we created a workload staffing model. This takes 100 different data elements and over 1 million calculations that takes into account the current volume of activity, apprehensions, seizures, hours of operation, how many folks that are on board now, and it it basically takes that number, and it's a very dynamic process, and it'll tell you based upon that workload, this is, and the time it takes to do those different functions in the workload, how many bodies that you need. The nice thing about this one is it's not a static process, it's a very dynamic process. So in the case where you're indicating, say you see an uptick in activity at a port of entry or an area for a year or two, that workload staffing model will dictate what that number should be based upon that volume, that activity, that workload. If it moves to a different area, the workload staffing model will also readjust.
Let me stop you. Yeah, a lot of what you said is very bureaucratic, and I've got just a little bit of time left. Mr. Holman, what do you say about the statement by Ms. Gambler that because of the transition from using operational control and so forth, that she says, therefore, until new goals and measures are developed, DHS and Congress could experience reduced oversight and DHS accountability. What do you say about that? That's a pretty serious charge, really.
Yes, I can say our operational tempo now, we're shoulder to shoulder with the Border Patrol. Our level of collaboration has never been higher. My staff meets with the Border Patrol staff at least once a week talking about enforcement strategies on the border. We, as a matter of business, we detain all recent border entrants. So I think we're doing the right thing. I think with the resources we have, and I think we're executing the mission at all-time high. I mean, my removals at a record high, my arrests at a record high, my detentions at a record high, and I think the mission that us and the Border Patrol are working hand in hand along with CBP, I think it makes sense. I think it's successful.
Chairman Chavez mentioned 4.3 million coming across just on one program. Can anybody on the panel tell me how many people are entering this country legally each year? Does anybody have Ms. Gambler, do you know anything about that? Somebody should know that, surely.
We could provide that number to you for the record, sir. I don't know it off the top of my head.
All right, and what are the latest estimates as to how many are coming across illegally? Surely this panel should know something like that. Your latest guesses or estimates.
Our estimates right now, sir, we're averaging approximately this fiscal year in FY13, approximately 1,100 apprehensions. If you take a look at what we're trying to design as it relates to the effectiveness rate and getting what the Chairman mentioned as the denominator, trying to get that known flow, we don't have those estimates right now, but we are working towards getting that as well.
Well, I think that's something you should provide to us as soon as you get it.
Agreed.
All right. Thank you very much.
Following up on that, Mr. Fisher, how many turn back souths per day?
I'd have to go back. I don't know specifically what that number is, but we do track that, and I can get that for the committee.
How many gotaways?
I can do that as well. I don't have that number on the top of my head. The effectiveness rate along the southwest border right now is approximately 75%.
Again, I really challenge that number, as I think the GAO does. Those are just the known. Those are the known gotaways, right? Does not include turn back souths or TBSs?
It includes all of those variables, sir. It includes all the apprehensions, the gotaways, and the turnbacks. That is the effectiveness formula. And so when you take a look at the apprehensions, you add those to your turnbacks, and then you divide that by the total entries. That is the effectiveness rate, and we're working.
That assumes that we. What about the ones we're not aware of?
Right. And so there's two different methodologies that we use. What I mentioned earlier in my testimony about the geospatial intelligence piece and the use of the Predator Bs is really to do just that, is to shrink the border, increase our situational awareness so that we have a better sense of what that number is to cover a lot more of that border.
We'll now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, the always dapper Mr. Gowdy.
Thank you, Chairman Chaffetz. I want to welcome all of our witnesses. Chairman Chaffetz shared a bit of philosophy with me a couple of nights ago at dinner, and I wrote it down to make sure I got it right. He said, if you don't know where you're going, you probably won't know when you get there. Yeah, that's what he said. Ms. Gambler, I am asked constantly about border security. So tell me what is an ambitious but reasonable goal with respect to border security to the extent that it is a conditioned precedent to any other part of immigration reform? What are we looking for?
Congressman, setting a goal for border security would be the responsibility of DHS, or would be a policy call on the part of Congress.
If you were Empress for the day, what would you do? What's a realistic but ambitious goal?
Again, that's a responsibility for the department to set that goal,
and
it's a policy call for Congress. As would be the case for any bill, GAO's role would be to review the implementation of any provisions or programs that the executive branch might implement resulting from a bill if we were asked to do so. And
how long have you worked for GAO?
I've been with GAO since 2002.
All right, so that's 11 years?
Yes.
Surely you have an opinion on what is likely to work. I mean, because you probably are following the debate just like the rest of us are. Before you get to any other aspect of immigration reform, they want to make sure the border is secure. That's an easy phrase to use, but it's a hard phrase to implement. So what is a realistic definition of a secure border?
What we've recommended is that the Department of Homeland Security set a goal for its border security efforts, and then set metrics for assessing progress made against that goal. DHS is in the process of developing those goals and measures, and we've suggested that they set timeframes for completing those goals and metrics so that there are mechanisms in place for assessing what the goal is for border security and how that can be measured.
Why is there not currently a goal, or am I just naive?
Up until fiscal year 2011, DHS was using operational control as its performance goal and measure for border security. They discontinued using that measure in fiscal year 2011. What they told us was that they wanted to move toward more quantifiable metrics for border security, and using the number of apprehensions on the southwest border was designed to be an interim measure. Now, DHS said they were going to put those metrics in place by fiscal year 2012, but have been using the number of apprehensions as the interim measure. And we recommended, again, that they set timeframes and milestones for completing development of those goals and measures.
Well, let me ask it another way. If you had to go back to your hometown and you had to stand in front of people who are asking you whether or not the border was secure, what metrics would you use in answering their question?
If I was asked that question, I would say that the department has not yet set goals and measures for assessing how secure the border is, and so that makes it difficult to assess against criteria or a yardstick on what level of security.
Difficult may be an understatement. Makes it kind of hard. For those of us who are interested in getting on to the next steps of immigration reform, if you don't get over the condition precedent and can prove to your constituents that you have a reasonable but ambitious border security goal, it makes the rest of us pretty tough. All right, visa overstays. Do you know how they are currently investigated?
We issued a report on overstays in April 2011 and have ongoing work looking at overstay enforcement efforts as well. That ongoing work will issue in July, next month.
And I promise I'm going to read the report, but you already know something about the issue. So yes. Currently, if Mr. Chaffetz were here on a visa and he overstayed, how would we know? How would we investigate it? How would we decide what we're going to do about it? What's currently being done?
If a foreign national enters the U.S. and there is no corresponding departure record for that person, that record would be checked against numerous DHS databases and would be prioritized against ICE's law enforcement and public safety priorities. If the person met those priorities, their information, their record would be sent forward for investigation to ICE field offices.
You wouldn't have to wait for that person to commit some other offense or have some other interaction with government, would you, surely?
The overstays that ICE is prioritizing for investigation are those who meet their public safety and national security priorities. If the person would not meet those priorities and they were likely an overstay, they would not be investigated by ICE.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I was going to ask my friends-in-law, I was going to thank them for their service, and I was going to also ask them about what role, if any, state and local law enforcement should play in assisting them, but I'm out of time, so I'll yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The gentleman from South Carolina, I think, would be most interested to know that based on the formula that Ms. Gambler just shared, the majority of visas that we give out in this country are B1, B2 entry exits. Mr. Murphy testified that they don't track any of the exits, none of them. So we have absolutely zero information about who may be overstaying, who may have gone beyond the bounds because they're variable. They're only supposed to go into certain parts of the country. It's probably the biggest gaping hole we have on our border. There's no tracking. There's no information. There's no statistics. There's no field reports. There's nothing unless that person commits a crime. And I would hope that we could provide, that the agency would be able to provide, through maybe the Department of Justice and others, a report of how many people committed crimes that came here on a B1, B2 entry-exit visa. And somehow, some way, we're going to unearth that number. But now we'll recognize the gentleman from Mr. Bentivolio for 5 minutes, the gentleman from Michigan, and he's now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for appearing here today. I really appreciate it. Maybe you can help me clear up some questions I have. I keep hearing in the media we have 11 million people here that shouldn't be here. How do we arrive at that number? Is that something, I mean, if you have no way of knowing who you didn't catch, how do you come up with a figure of 11 million? Anybody?
Congressman, I don't know where that number comes from.
I keep hearing it in the media.
Oh, I've heard it as well, but I don't know the attribution and where that came from.
So it's really not 11 million. It could be more, right?
I don't know that either.
We don't. We really don't know, do we? Because we don't know. Well, it's the old saying, I guess, well, if a crime is committed and nobody's there, how do you know the crime was committed? Except by evidence, right? But we don't have any evidence, something like that. Anyway, I have a few other questions. What percentage of border does technology cover?
I don't know the percentage. That's a really good question. I can find out and get back to you, sir. Specifically, we have approximately 15,000 pieces of equipment covering about 17,000 miles. It doesn't cover all 17,000. That's just based on the military specs in terms of what the equipment can do. You have to then take into consideration the geography and the topography in which it's located. But I don't know the percentage, but we can factor that as well.
Okay, and I also heard you have cameras that do thermal imaging, other cameras. So when you detect somebody that's crossing illegally, what's the response time?
It really depends on where the entry is detected. Again, depending upon where we have patrol agents, depending upon whether we do it within the first 100 meters or whether we do it within the first mile. Terrain is going to dictate that. The tactics and techniques of the agents on the ground will determine where is the best way to make the approach in a safe and secure manner.
Okay, and a Border Patrolman told me that he went out to, there was a alert, he had to go out there, and there were 26 people, and they just scattered.
Right.
And my question is, how do you send 1 or 2 Border Patrol agents to pick up 26 people? I mean, that's, especially in the terrain that I was in when I toured the border.
Right.
I mean, is there another way? I mean, so he said, well, they caught 3, but 23 got away. Is that how we determine the number 11 million?
I don't believe so, but to your earlier point, sir, whether there's 1 Border Patrol agent that responds or whether there's 2 or 3 Border Patrol agents responds really determines how they're applying the strategy on the ground. In some cases, the Border Patrol agent may not know how many people. It may just be a sensor indication, so we may not have specific quantities of individuals that may have made the incursion. And many times, Border Patrol agents are assisted with air-to-ground support. Our Office of Air and Marine Operations provides overwatch for us in that regard, and our strategy is built on being able to deploy and redeploy resources for those Border Patrol agents if, in fact, they come across a group of 23 and they run. Generally, what would then happen is we would continue tracking operations, and more resources would be brought to bear to be able to continue to track to the extent possible to make sure that we apprehend everybody that comes across in between the ports of entry.
I also heard when I was there stories of hang gliders flying out of Mexico, you know, the personal gliders,
Yes, sir.
dropping off drugs in the United States and then flying back. Are you doing anything to stop that?
Yes, sir. Matter of fact, we saw I believe you're referring to the ultralights over the last few
Ultralight,
years.
thank you.
Yes, and one of the things I think I alluded to earlier in my testimony, when you look at the transnational criminal organizations and those networks that own and operate within the border areas, they're always going to adapt their operations to be able to increase their profit margin. And one of the things that we've seen is the ultralights. We are working with the Air Marine Operations Center in Riverside, California, which gets radar feeds from throughout the United States to be able to adjust those radar to be able to detect low-flying aircraft like the ultralights. It's not perfect yet. We also have Border Patrol agents that use mobile surveillance systems on the ground and be able to look up to be able to identify those ultralights as well.
Okay, and I have, you ever heard of the term, and maybe you could explain to me what the term means, catch and release?
Catch and release, I believe, was a phrase a few years ago, and I believe it was coined, perhaps maybe not the first time, but used quite a bit by Secretary Chertoff when he was the Secretary of Homeland Security. It was meant when we were seeing increases in activity in locations that part of the policy at the time is people that we were going to apprehend in between the ports of entry. We were not going to just release what we would call on their own recognizance. So the whole policy, and where it is today, certainly in high-risk areas, is we want to maintain the policy of catching individuals that have come illegally between the ports of entry and make sure that they are detained.
Okay, so a person that came here illegally, you catch them, and then you release them on their own.
No, sir. The current policy, it was to end catch and release. In other words,
Okay.
in some locations over the years, depending upon fluctuations and funding availability for the enforcement and removal operations, individuals that would otherwise or that would request a hearing from an immigration judge, if they did not pose any risk to the public and there was no detention space allowed, there was a provision within the administrative piece to release them on their own recognizance pending their administrative hearing with the judge. So what we looked at over the course of the years, and that policy is adjusted depending upon what resources are available, and it fluctuates to be able to minimize risk.
Thank you. Chairman, I have one more question. Oh, okay, great.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Great, thank you. Let's see, they would go to trial or go in front of a judge, and the judge would release them, correct?
Well,
Is that
generally, and not to get, because I'm not the expert anymore, the real Border Patrol agents do the work in the field, but generally what would happen is once we made the determination, we issued a warrant of arrest and a notice to appear. That notice to appear was for an immigration hearing.
okay? How many would come back and actually reappear before the judge, or
Yeah,
do you have a percentage that come back, or do they all come back, or just 50%, 75%?
I don't have that number right off the top of my head, sir, but it would depend on which year you're talking about or recently.
It's probably closer to about 10%. Would that be right?
I would not want to guess at that, sir.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time. Thank you.
Thank you. Now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Tierney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank the witnesses for their testimony here today. Sounds like you have a relatively easy job, gentlemen. So challenging to say the least on that. So over the last decade, the U.S. taxpayer has funded tens of billions of dollars in additional personnel, technology, and infrastructure along that southwest border. I think we've installed radiation detection portals, non-intrusive imaging equipment, license plate readers, camera systems, fencing, and the list goes on. Despite the staggering sums of that money, we know that cartels are still able to bring illicit drugs into the country. Persons looking for work still cross over. Organized crime networks still manage to smuggle various forms of contraband through these ports of entry. So nobody disputes the fact that this guns, guards, and gate spending has been effective to a degree, but not all spending is equal, I guess. So what I'm trying to do is, as we go forward, take a look and see which areas of investment are more effective and produce better results on that. So let me begin, if I can, with you, Chief Fisher, on the gates. As I understand it, building the border fence or improving the existing fence makes sense in some locations, but may not make sense in others. For instance, just west of San Isidro, California, people say it helped control the illegal crossing problem there. Others say that it provided significant benefits at other locations, particularly in urbanized crossing corridors. Does that sound accurate to you?
It does, sir.
Okay. Ms. Gambler, I also understand the GAO has questioned the effectiveness of the fence and often looks at the high cost of building the fence, and that question has been raised for a number of years. Is that also true?
In our work, Congressman, we did find that DHS had not taken steps to assess or quantify the contributions that fencing is making to border security, and we recommended that they conduct a cost-effective analysis to do that.
Okay. So if Congress were to decide to double the size of the existing fence, or at least add hundreds of additional miles to it, how would the Department determine where to build that extra fence?
I don't know how they would determine where to build the fence, but they do have analysis underway to, in response to our recommendation, to determine what contribution fencing is making to border security efforts. And that would be an important question going forward.
I'm guessing that it makes sense to add fencing in some areas and maybe a total waste of money in others. Is that generally true?
That would be for the Department of Homeland Security to determine.
Mr. Fisher, Mr. Murphy, does that sound true to you, that in some areas it would be a good investment, other areas it may not be a good investment at all?
That's accurate, sir, yes.
Okay. And are you comfortable that the Department is putting criteria in place to help identify which areas are which?
I am, sir, yes.
Ms. Scanlon, there are also proposals to add new sensors, technologies, camera systems all along the border to detect illegal crossings. I know that GAO previously reviewed some major technology problems with the SBI net and found hundreds of millions of dollars been squandered in that effort. There are challenges that obviously have to be overcome. So before we invest in that type of technology, billions of dollars or whatever, can you tell us what lessons were learned from that whole SBI net situation?
Our body of work looking at DHS's management of border security, border surveillance technologies has identified challenges in the management of that technology, including the technology being delivered on schedule and within cost parameters that were set for the technology. Back in 2012, we issued a report on DHS's new plan for deploying border surveillance technologies to Arizona, and one of the key findings from that report was that DHS had not fully documented the underlying analysis and justification used to support the types, quantities, and locations of technologies it plans to deploy under that new plan.
And you're comfortable that the Department is responding to your reports and your recommendations?
The Department did agree with those recommendations and is taking steps to address them. We do have ongoing work reviewing that new plan and are monitoring DHS's actions to respond to our recommendations.
Okay. So now we're talking about possibly increasing the number of agents exponentially on that basis. So what steps should the Border Patrol take to make sure that the increase of personnel is effectively utilized, that they're placed in the right places and the right numbers?
The Border Patrol issued its new strategic plan last year in May 2012, and as part of implementation of that plan, we understand that the Border Patrol is developing a process for assessing what resources are needed and how to deploy them. We understand that that process is moving forward, and they're looking to implement it in fiscal year 2013 and 14.
And Mr. Fisher, can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Certainly. Within the framework of the strategy, we really focused our efforts on being risk-based as opposed to just asking for more and more resources and deploying them in a lateral fashion across the southwest border. That was a significant strategic shift in our thinking and certainly within our deployments over the last couple of years. As we move forward, we also recognize that technology has come a long way. I can still remember as a young agent getting the first pair of AM-PVS-7 Bravos, which were the old night vision goggles from the military after the first Gulf War, and I thought at that point, we were really going to make a difference in border security because now for the very first time as an agent, at night I was able to see 5 feet in front of me. I thought that was going to change the operation by which the Border Patrol, started back in 1924. We continue to learn and adjust with the technology, and I will tell you, as good as technology is getting, and as more technology as we get, it is still no replacement for a well-trained Border Patrol agent, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what you have flying in the air, it doesn't matter how many unattended ground sensors you have buried on the ground. The Border Patrol agent still, a lot of times alone, as we have heard earlier today, has to close that 50 meters by himself or herself. And the thinking and the training and those Border Patrol agents who, as we speak right now, are out there on patrol, there is no substitute for that. I'm very proud of the work that they do, and it's a combination of taking a look at the best technology that's available, taking a look at the infrastructure, and then continuing to train and support the Border Patrol agents is the best way, and that's the way that we're approaching the implementation against this new strategy.
No, thank you. Thank you again for your work and for your testimony here today.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Mr. Gozar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chief Fisher and Mr. Murphy, in your shared testimony, you said the following: "We do not use this term, Operation Control, as a measure of border security because the complex nature of the magnitude of different border conditions cannot be described by a single objective measure. Although an indicator of success, we cannot measure border security solely based on crime rates because even the safest communities in America have some crime. If you are claiming that one objective measure is not enough to measure border security, then why is only one measure, apprehension rates, used or cited when top DHS officials try to pass off our southern border as secure?"
Well, apprehension still is a metric that we capture and report to the Department. However, we've learned quite a bit over the last couple of years, and I think Ms. Gambler talked on some of that. The apprehension number really doesn't tell you much because if you compare it and contrast it from previous fiscal years, as the Chairman mentioned, if it goes up, I can say that that is success, and if it goes down, I can say that it's success. We recognized a few years ago that that in and of itself was not a good metric, and but you need the apprehension to then peel back the layers to understand how many people within that total population of arrests were there, because recidivism does matter. It's important to me and it's important to the organization to distinguish those individuals who are only apprehended 2 times from those individuals that reapprehended perhaps 6 or 8 times.
Yeah. Would you agree, Mr. Murphy?
Well, sir, from our standpoint, as I indicated in my testimony earlier, we look at it as a well-managed border. I don't think there is one single metric. There's a variety of things that we do look at, but I think what we have tried to do is to look at transforming the way we do business, our processes, bringing in new technology, trying to basically do a better job much more efficiently, and in that way we feel that we're going to have much more success, not only from a standpoint of apprehensions or seizures, but also from the standpoint of facilitating the legitimate flow of traffic and trade.
Are you aware of an experiment in which a drone actually looked at a corridor over time and looked at apprehension rates and made a comparison of actually who crossed that border versus apprehension rates? Are you aware of that study?
No, sir.
Actually, it's very staggering because it showed that there were 422 apprehensions, but in actuality there were over 7,000 people that crossed the border. Are you aware of that, Ms. Gambler?
We have not seen that study.
Really? And we're going to trust our border security with Homeland Security, and we still don't understand that? How familiar are you with the numbers that you're citing to the American public and to Congress in regards to the number of illegal immigrants in this country?
In terms of the data we reported in our December 2011 report, we reported the data that Border Patrol had available on number of apprehensions.
Based on apprehensions. So this is showing you in this technology aspect that we're showing less than 6% actually being apprehended versus what is actually a known factor. Is that true?
Again, we looked at the data that the Border Patrol was collecting at the time that we did the work, and we looked at number of apprehensions as well as estimated known illegal entries and presented that data. We did also identify some limitations with that data.
And it's very antiquated. I'm just pointing out that when you're citing these studies, they're antiquated measures, and we need to have more opportunities for a diverse opportunity, not just from Federal government, State, and locals to look at the metrics in regards to border security. Would you not agree?
And we recommended, and the Department is in the process of setting goals and metrics for border security, and we recommended that they come up with timeframes for completing that effort so that the measures can be completed in a timely manner.
And does that include State and local officials so that we have a uniform policy enforcement all the way through this country, not just on border?
It would be for the Department to set what those goals and metrics are and who to...
To be honest with you, ma'am, I'm not real comfortable. I'm from Arizona, and we've got some problems here. And border security should be a uniform policy that's all the way through. And I can tell you, coming from a number of people within my conference, it's not going to be left up to Homeland Security. It will be a joint venture in regards to having border security, so that we see the metrics from Border Patrol all the way encompassing all avenues of law enforcement, because I think that's what the American public wants, is we have limited resources. Homeland Security has not really restored a lot of trust. Trust is a series of promises kept, and we don't find much with that with Homeland Security. Let me ask you another question. How do you feel about border security around Yuma, Arizona?
Around Yuma, Arizona? In our work, when DHS was using operational control as its performance measure for border security, Yuma reported that its miles were under operational control. Now, that was up till fiscal year 2010.
Well, let's go. I got to take a little leniency here, because it actually is one of the shining stars in regards to border security, and that's the proper answer. In fact, in that segment, there has not been a border crossing, illegal border crossing, in that 40 or 50 some miles in Yuma, in the Yuma sector, for over 6 years. Is that not true?
I'm not aware of that specifically, but in fiscal year 2010,
when you're coming here to represent what DHS's proposal, what we need to do is we need to have success models, and Yuma is a success model. It has border fence. It has a unified application of the law from border security to law enforcement, and more important is actually prosecution. Is it not true that those folks from the Tucson sector do not want to be pushed to the Yuma sector because they're going to get prosecuted? Is that not true?
We haven't specifically looked at that issue.
I'm having problems once again here, that I'm having somebody from Homeland Security that I see on a Senate bill that we're going to entertain, that you're going to have the border security all the way through, and you have no metrics, you don't know what works, you don't cite that working, and yet you're still coming up that we're going to entrust you with border security. Once again, Ms. Gambler, I want to say trust is a series of promises kept. Tell me why I should have to trust in the DHS. I will yield back for the second round of questions.
Mr. Chairman, might I just interject for a question here? Ms. Gambler, you're with the Government Accountability Office, not Homeland Security, right?
I'm with the Government Accountability Office.
Thank you. So I hope that would absolve you from some of the information that was being sought from you, or a position sought of you, and everything like that. I think you're doing an excellent job, and I just want to clarify that she's not Homeland Security. The other thing I was going to ask the gentleman, if he would produce that study that you mentioned at the beginning of your questions. Could you tell us who the author was, and
we will certainly
do it, and make that available for the committee?
You betcha.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The Chair now recognizes the gentlewoman from New York, Mrs. Maloney.
Good evening, and thank you for your hard work and for testimony today before the committee. I'm concerned about commerce. Not only do we need to keep bad products out and Homeland Security and all of that focus, but Mexico is a very important trading partner with America, and it's our largest. It's really our third largest trading partner, and our relationship has grown tremendously since NAFTA and significantly in the past years. And Mexico has grown to be roughly $500 billion in bilateral trade. That's important to the economy of America. And it's also sustained through the trade, by some estimates, 6 million jobs in the United States. So it has economic value that's important to our people. And they say that U.S. sales to Mexico are larger than all U.S. exports to the BRIC countries, which are Brazil, Russia, India, and China. So in short, trade with Mexico is important for our jobs. And I guess I should ask Mr. Murphy, isn't it true that part of your profession is not only to protect the border, but also to help facilitate trade between our two countries and at our ports of entry, both land and sea? And is that true? Is that part of your goal, and not only security, which is #1 priority, but also to allow legitimate, fair trade?
Congresswoman, thank you for the question. You're absolutely right, and that's one of the we believe that border security and economic prosperity go hand in hand. And we also believe, and recently there was a study done by USC, the CREATE study, that showed that by adding additional CBP personnel onto the ports of entry to help facilitate not only the border security aspect, but the trade facilitation aspect, it helps build, it takes down, it adds to the GDP. It also takes, for lost opportunity costs, it reduces those. But absolutely, and we've partnered both with Canada and Mexico. We have our 21st Century Border and the Beyond the Border initiatives. In Mexico right now, we're working on Otay Mesa and Laredo on pre-inspection pilots. So we're partnering very closely with Mexico. We recognize the importance of trade, and it's the lifeblood of our economy. And I just think that CBP and OFO have particularly matured in recent years in recognizing that dynamic and the importance of that trade.
Well, you mentioned the Laredo site and port, and that's a very important site that I understand that 700 of the Fortune 1000 companies do international business through that port. Can you just give an example on the ground on how you protect against terrorists and illegal guns and really bad things coming into our country, and also allowing the trade that's necessary? How do you make that happen in a way that allows the trade but also has a significant strength to stop terrorist or illegal guns or other activities?
Well, there's a number of ways. We look at, one, we brought technology. We have our RPMs there, obviously, for the detection of nuclear radiological elements. We also have our license plate readers. And on the southwest border right now, RFID technology, right now 60% of the documents being used on the border are RFID compliant. We're trying to enable both trusted trader programs and our trusted traveler programs. But from a standpoint of the trade, we're trying to, again, focus our resources there. We're working with, again, on this trusted trader program, and we're with our CTPAT. We have a number of programs. We have a number partnered with the industry. Laredo is a huge industry for trade and for the United States. And again, we've recognized that fact. We've directed our resources. Again, I had mentioned earlier about the workload staffing model. This is a way that we can direct resources, allocate resources where they're truly needed, both from a trade standpoint and also from an enforcement standpoint.
There was a report that I read a synopsis of. I believe it came out of Princeton University, but one of the think tanks. And I'm going to find that report and get it to the chairman. And it said that a side effect of the increased border security was that more immigrants were staying in the country, that usually a lot of Mexican workers would come in, do seasonal work, and then leave and go back to Mexico. But now, because the border is becoming much tougher to get in and out of, that they're just staying in America. Now, I just ask anyone if they'd like to comment on it, or if you've seen that. Is there any substance to the idea that this report put forward?
I have not seen that.
You have not seen that. Anyone else want to comment on it? My time is, would you like to comment on GAO?
We haven't seen that study. We haven't reviewed that.
Or the idea, have you seen that that's happening? Or not?
We haven't evaluated that issue.
Well, thank you. My time has expired. Thank you.
Thank you. I now would like to recognize myself for 5 minutes. In February, I think it was, I told my staff, after several long weeks working hard, if I could find 2 days where I could go someplace warm with some sand, and they sent me to Arizona to tour the border fence. It was a big eye-opener. And earlier, Mr. Fisher, we discussed the ultralights, and Mr. Murphy, did you comment on that as well, or you did? No, but if I'm not mistaken, Border Patrol received $100 million for the ultralight problem. I mean, that's an awful lot of money, and yet we're really not seeing any significant change. Can you tell me what seems to be the problem? I mean, $100 million, you could probably post quite a few Border Patrolmen just to sit there and look up in the sky, but nothing seems to be getting done because I keep hearing it's a problem from the boots on the ground.
It has been defined as an emerging threat over the last couple of years and continues to be so today. One of the things to take into consideration is ultralights can really take off and land pretty much anywhere. So the whole area of operation for the smuggling organizations opens up that aperture than other areas that we've seen across the southwest border. We have and are continue to experiment with ground-based radar to be able to tweak the radar to make sure that we are able to identify low-flying ultralights and others that may be flying in that particular area. The truth of the matter is we still look to find out and adjust our policies. First and foremost, as a law enforcement organization, we enforce laws in the United States, and we do so with a matter of consistency, compassion within the Constitution. One of the challenges that we face right now is even if we detect an ultralight and identifying it and being able to track it, say, with a UH-60 or a Black Hawk helicopter, the end game, if you will, has not been established in terms of what we can do to that particular ultralight, because in many cases, the ultralight, when it makes entry into the United States, does not land. It'll simply just kick out its cargo, which up until this point has been narcotics, predominantly marijuana, and then there's a ground crew that later, picks up their marijuana and moves on. And so it doesn't land in the United States. It just turns around and goes back into Mexico. And so we're working with the Department and Science and Technology to increase the effectiveness by which we detect the entry in the first instance by the ultralights, and then continuing to work within the law enforcement framework on how we can mitigate this evolving threat.
Yeah. According to Border Patrol agents, the $100 million detection program has not worked and has been a waste of taxpayer money. Another quote, Border Patrol on ultralight aircrafts, impossible to stop. We don't have the technology. This was also reaffirmed on my official tour of Nogales with the Border Patrol. Another Border Patrol agent, difficult mission to find drop locations, intercept narcotics, and arrest smugglers. Success rates are low. Those are the comments from the boots on the ground, those guys in the trenches. And I have another question in regarding this. It would seem to me that, we have this very expensive fence. It's 18 foot tall, and I'm asking questions, and I just want answers. You can't put razor wire on top because people are hopping over the fence. People are driving up and actually with a torch cutting through the steel and sending people in that way, and then they're welding it back up so the Border Patrol doesn't see it. And then in other cases, what else? Number of tunnels. There's no real detection. And I asked about dogs. Now, is there some problem with employing more dogs with our Border Patrol agents?
Not that I'm aware of, sir, no.
Okay. So instead of this $100 million on a system that doesn't work, we know dogs can detect, I know this for a fact, can detect things in the sky as well as on the ground, and it's very low tech, maybe not as sexy, but what's your comments on that? Should we employ more dogs versus $100 million worth of high tech?
I wouldn't suggest substituting, canine and their handlers for technology or infrastructure. We employ approximately 300 canines and handlers throughout the border. They, along with the horses and other types of technology that we have, is a complement. And the other thing to take into consideration, or I would perhaps foot stomp this as well, is that each section of the border is different. What may work in a place like Yuma, Arizona, may not work in a place like Nogales. Some of the ultralight technology may not work in the sections of El Paso, Texas, but it works really well in a place like El Centro, California. And so it's identifying the geography, the tactics, techniques, and procedures of the criminal organizations, understanding how they operate, understanding the extent to which they're vulnerable so that we then can exploit that. And there is no cookie-cutter approach to be able to do that, in my opinion, sir.
Thank you. We'll come back to this. Chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Illinois, Ms. Kelly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to talk about the data issue. One thing that seems clear from today's hearing and from the Government's Accountability Office comprehensive review of the Department's Border Security statistics is that the number of immigrants apprehended by the Department or apprehensions has declined markedly along the southwest border between 2006 and 2011. This amounted to about a 68% drop in apprehensions, which seems to suggest the border enforcement is currently working. Ms. Gambler, do you infer this from the data that the number of illegal border crossings has fallen? And if so, isn't this a good thing?
The data that we reported in that report and that you cited was on apprehension. So that's the number of illegal entrants who the Border Patrol arrested. And that data shows that apprehensions declined from fiscal year 2006 to 2011. The 2012 data reported by Border Patrol indicate that apprehensions increased from fiscal year 2011 levels. In that report, we also provide data on estimated known illegal entrants by sector, and those numbers, as estimated by the Border Patrol, did decrease in southwest border sectors over that time.
While the meaning of apprehensions data by itself seems to be the subject of some debate, it remains clear that the Department continues to use this figure on an interim basis until it's able to develop an alternate approach, and that poses some concerns. Ms. Gambler, how long has Border Patrol used the numbers of apprehensions as its interim performance goal?
They've been using that since fiscal year 2011.
Okay. And Chief, welcome, Chief Fisher. When will Border Patrol begin using a more comprehensive data point for measuring flows across the border?
We started developing those this year, and we'll baseline this year and really start with the new metrics in fiscal year 14, which will start 1 October.
Okay. And can you please explain how the Border Patrol currently uses apprehensions data, such as where to allocate resources?
Right. Well, the apprehension data in and of itself does not dictate where we deploy or redeploy resources. That decision is based on risk, and it's done both in terms of my staff at headquarters looking at the strategic laydown of all forces within the northern, southern, and coastal environments, and really it's left in the hands of the field commanders in the field to be able to deploy and redeploy those resources within the areas that they have operational control over.
And if you were to get additional Border Patrol agents, where would you place them? Where do you see the biggest need?
Certainly. We would look into areas, for instance, of where we're unable, perhaps, to put fence or unable to put certain pieces of technology, because it's a combination. It's not just, putting more Border Patrol agents. Mm-hmm. We have to do that in consultation with certainly the field commanders and the Border Patrol agents to tell us what works, what doesn't work, and we would make sure that we put the resources in the areas of highest risk along our borders, and then we would work our way back from there.
And when you say they tell you what works and doesn't work, how often do you check? Do you have every 3 months or every month? What's the evaluation process?
Well, quite frankly, with 21,370 Border Patrol agents, they are not shy to call me and let me know through email what works and what doesn't work. And I appreciate their willingness to tell us in headquarters what is the best approach. Okay.
Ms. Gambler, do you have any current concerns about the apprehensive data and how it's used?
In terms of the apprehensions data, that is data on the number of illegal entrants that the Border Patrol apprehends. In our December 2011 report, we did identify some limitations with the data that Border Patrol collects and estimates for what are called turnbacks and gotaways. And the limitations with that data preclude Border Patrol from using that data to make comparisons in performance across sectors. Now, Border Patrol issued updated guidance to the field in September 2012 to provide for a more common approach to estimating turnbacks and gotaways across the southwest border sectors, and we understand that the Border Patrol sectors are implementing that guidance.
Okay. And Chief, do you feel like this will give a more complete data picture, including gotaways and turnbacks?
We're getting better at that, but let me be clear. We are trying, in some cases, I say we broadly, have to be very careful of applying a very specific scientific method in accuracy and certitude to a function and operation that does not allow that. We're going to do the best we can to determine how many people came in, and of that number, how many people did we apprehend. But no technology or no system that I'm aware of is going to, with 100% accuracy, make that determination going forward, and it doesn't exist in other law enforcement organizations that I'm aware of.
Well, my time is up. Thank you.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Arizona, Dr. Gosar.
Thank you again, Mr. Chairman. Before I start my second line of questioning, I want to make a point that we make sure that Mr. Langolaise has had an opportunity to come before this committee. Either he comes here or we go there, because I think we need to have this discussion in front of the American people. Ms. Gambler, one of the things that I'm critical about, and to be honest with you, I'm a big fan of GAO. But in this case, what I want to see is, you cited a number of studies in regards to the gentlewoman from Illinois. I need to see that same type of application from where we're coming from in Arizona. And so I want to see some equal attitude. Mr. Fisher, you just made a comment that what works in Yuma doesn't work anywhere else. But the principles are the same, are they not? Deterrent, enforcement, and apprehension, and then also going before justice. Is that true?
The principles and the strategy apply, but the application in the different geographic areas do not.
Oh, I'm happy with that. I'm happy with that. Let me ask you a question, both gentlemen, Mr. Fisher and Mr. Murphy. In your testimony, you also went to say a secure border means living free from fear in the towns and their cities. Do you feel that the folks in southern Arizona can actually say that today?
In some locations, that would be accurate, and others probably not.
Some.
That's correct.
How about you?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So I would say if we really want to start making this deterrent or dictation, probably about the 50 miles coming from the California border is secure. Beyond going into the Tucson sector from that 50 miles, not secure. We got some type of problem with the Tucson sector, and then going further east, we got bigger problems. Do we not?
In somewhat of a west to east, quick look at the border, which, and by the way, sir, as you mentioned, that always going to fluctuate with the criminal organizations adjusting their operations.
Oh, I know, and from what I understand, we got a problem in the Tucson sector. It has shifted more to the Texas side, but you're right. But there are still some generalities that we can hold true. Can we not?
Certainly.
Okay. Can we put the slide up here, up on the screen? These signs were found posted not at the border, not within 20 miles of the border, but were posted 80 miles from the border. Our local law enforcement officers, in addition to Custom and Border Patrol officers, have told us that our policies are failing, and the enforcement measures are so shoddy that it's an equivalent to ceding parts of our great country to cartels. I am saddened by the terrible amount of illegal activity on our southern border, but I'm downright angry that the Federal Government isn't doing its part to protect its own citizens. I do thank the thousands of agents and officers that put their lives on the line day in and day out, but it seems that there is such a disconnect between those on the front lines and the bureaucrats that have marched up here on the Hill to tell us what they think and what we want to hear. Thankfully, from time, we bypass the so-called proper channels and go directly to the source, which is what I do. I'm a science guy. To get the raw intelligence before it's scrubbed and framed here in Washington. I have talked to numerous CBP agents during my time in Congress. The story they paint is far different than the one painted by DHS representatives here today and in the news media at large. One agent told me that the methods for counting border crossings is completely inadequate, as the officers are told to count tracks going north. The problem is that the drug runners cover their tracks very carefully going north because they don't want to be tracked. The number found going north is often actually less than those found going south because the cartel members don't care if they're being apprehended going south. They've already dropped off their drugs, and since they're already going south, they might as well get a free ride home. Another agent told me that when he first started, one of his supervisors started a meeting one day by saying, "Apprehensions are down. We're not catching as many people." This particular officer lowered his head, feeling that he and his colleagues were about to be scolded for not doing their job. He could imagine to his surprise when he was congratulated and told good job by that same supervisor. One agent, a man who puts his life on the line each day, referred to the apprehension metrics by measuring border control as asinine. Whereas Napolitano, our Secretary, claims that the border is safe and secure better than any time before, the people that actually do this for a living estimate that they might apprehend 20% of the border crossings on a good day. When it's possibly the most discouraging and shameful thing that I have been told by CBP agents on the ground is that they feel that they've signed up for one job when they actually have two jobs. They say their job is to fight the drug cartels and the so-called coyotes, but they also say their job is a constant fight with the Federal Government. In their words, they have to fight their own employer to do the job that they were hired. This is a situation that could only be created by this town. Mr. Chairman, I would ask that you consider having another hearing at a later date in which we can invite CBP officers and other state and local officers from the front lines, that they're actually able to offer us some real perspectives, highlight the real problems, and help guide us towards a real solution. When we start looking at the border, it's a fascinating issue. We have Forest Service, we have primitive areas, and we have to have a common sense policy in which to have apprehensions to make this country secure. So I'd like to hear from the Border Patrol agents directly. Thank you.
Thank you. The Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Mica.
Well, first of all,
absolutely had it with officials who refused to appear before our committee. This is the Chief Investigative Panel of the House of Representatives. What's this guy's name? Langolis? Langoy? Okay. I want a meeting, you're acting chair right now, but I want a meeting staff with Mr. Chaffetz and Mr. Issa. And I want these people held responsible. We will subpoena his butt in here, or they will appear before us one way or the other. This is the last time this is going to happen that I'll be involved in any of the subcommittees or the full committee, and have particularly a DHS staffer, and this is an important position, this isn't just any staff, not appear before this committee, and it's important that he appear with these other witnesses. I'm absolutely frosted, and this is the last time, I guarantee you. They will regret not appearing before our committee. I don't care who it is. So again, I know you're acting chair right now, sir, and staff, I want a meeting within the next 24 hours with Chairman Chaffetz and also Mr. Issa, and if we have to bring the other side of the aisle in, whatever it's going to take. But again, I'm not very pleased that we would have, again, the Associate Director for Refugee, Asylum, and International Operations thumb his nose at a legitimate request timely given to appear before this subcommittee of Congress. I have some information, I guess both Mr. Fisher and Mr. Murphy, Customs and Border Protection, who oversees procurement of some of the equipment, who would have the most knowledge? Both of you have equal knowledge? I understand, I wasn't here earlier, but you're looking at mobile rather than a fixed surveillance system. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
Mr. Murphy, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I have information from a whistleblower that there are several types of these surveillance equipments that are available. And one is available at $54 million, and the second is available at over $100 million. Are you aware of that, the two principal types of mobile surveillance equipment that you're using?
I'm not aware of that, sir.
No, sir.
Okay, well, I want you to be aware of it. This is information I have that, again, on the procurement, that you're picking or dividing the contract. I'm not interested in a 50% premium that the taxpayers pay on this mobile equipment. I want to report back from one or both of you on what's going on, what kind of equipment's being purchased, why you're paying twice as much for some equipment that has the same capability, I'm told, as the other equipment. Okay? Do you get it?
Yes.
Back to the committee. Through myself or the chair, I want a report on why you're paying twice as much for some equipment that has the same capability as others. We have very limited amount of money. Isn't that correct, gentlemen?
Yes. Yes, sir.
A constraint. So this is something that's been brought to my attention by a whistleblower. I want it verified and documented exactly what you're doing here. Okay, let's go to border crossings and protection. There's about 3 different types of entry documents. There's, well, 4 actually. The passport, right? Global entry. You can get in with a global entry card. Do you have to have a passport too? Murphy, Fisher?
Yes, sir. Based on the Western Hemisphere Travel Initiative, obviously we took about 8,000 different documents out there, and there's just a few. But with the passport, I mean,
can you get in with a global entry by itself?
Well,
yes or no?
I'll have to get back to you. I know that
you wait. What is your position?
I'm the acting assistant commissioner for field
and
operations.
You can't tell me whether I can get in or out with a global entry card, a document produced?
Well, in order to get the global entry card, you have to have that document, and your document and your face will appear on the screen when you're coming through.
But can someone entering the United States from Canada or Mexico or somewhere come in with just a global entry card?
I'll have to get back to you, sir.
Oh, dear God, please don't tell me that they're sending people. You're acting. That's pretty scary. Okay, there's two other documents. One is what, Nexus and FAST?
Well, those are all
Nexus
trusted
is
travel.
Canadian for
Yes.
Canada, is
And
FAST?
It's the cargo through trucks.
Okay, and there's another one then for, what's the one for Mexico? Is there a card for
There's
Mexico?
Sentry.
Sentry?
Sentry, Fast, Nexus,
Okay,
Global
we got
Entry.
all these cards. Well, I had a hearing a couple of weeks ago on the ID cards, which is, again, that so-and-so from DHS isn't here, so we can't go after him because they're responsible for overseeing some of the standards. But we have all these cards. None of them have a dual biometric capability. Is that right?
Dual metric in terms of?
Fingerprints and iris would be biometric.
No. Yes, they have, it's fingerprint.
But they do not have dual.
Right, so they don't have
We had
fingerprint or
also
iris.
someone at a hearing, get the transcript of it from last week, testify from the FBI that fingerprints can be altered. They're not secure. Okay, and the only secure means of identification that's guaranteed would be dual biometric. That's iris and fingerprint. But we do not have anything with iris, Nexus, FAST, Global Entry, Passport, what was the other one you told me? Sentry, right?
I believe we're looking at the iris, but I don't believe we have
For
it, sir.
11, 12 years, I asked that be done in law after 2001, I think in 2002, repeated it in law several times. And here, again, we do not have a DHS person to testify. So we have a document that's being used that can be undependable, and you don't know if Global Entry can be used to get in. What about the others? Can they get in with just from Canada with the Nexus card?
I apologize, sir. I know you have to have that card.
Oh, dear God, where do they send these people from?
Mr. Micah, we're going to have to wrap it up.
No, wait a second. Did you have 2 rounds?
Yeah,
Well, I haven't had my first, that's my first round, so I'll go into my second round. Did you have a waiting Democrat that
Yes,
wants
we
to
do.
go first?
Yes.
All right, well, we'll let her go, and then I'll come back. I'll try to recover in the meantime.
Gentlewoman from New Mexico. Gentlelady, excuse me, from New Mexico, Mrs. Grissom. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the panel. So I'm in an interesting position from New Mexico in that we have a small, unique border from New Mexico to Mexico, but are affected primarily by the border at El Paso. But not then, we don't get the same border health investments, we don't get the same federal investments for border protection issues that are beyond the border itself but invest in the state. And so we are affected by trade issues, which I know have been a topic this morning in terms of some of the questions. We're affected by the efficacy of what you do on the border. We have public safety issues, and we also have one of the highest drug trafficking and substance abuse problems per capita in the country. Now, as a proponent of comprehensive immigration reform, which I think helps us with border activity, because now we've got a legal pathway for folks to go back and forth, I am absolutely concerned about security issues. And I think that this question, given the topics of the questions today, is really for Ms. Gambler. Of all the investments, and of course we've had significant investments, and watching what's occurring in the Senate, there is momentum for even more investments at the border. Tell me which of those investments, personnel, equipment, fencing, high-tech investments, which of those are the most effective? And I need to know that both in terms of whether it's a cost-effective aspect or whether it's giving you those protections that we're interested in having occur at the border.
Congressman, your question gets at a key takeaway from a number of GAO reports that we've issued looking at CBP's efforts to deploy technology, infrastructure, and personnel along the border. And that takeaway is that the Department has been challenged to be able to identify the contributions that its investments have been making to border security. For example, we've recommended that the Department government conduct a cost-effective assessment to be able to assess the contributions that tactical infrastructure and fencing have made to border security. With regard to technology, in our review of DHS's new technology plan for placing surveillance technologies along the southwest border, we recommended that DHS identify the benefits and metrics for assessing implementation of the plan and the technologies going forward. So your question gets at a key takeaway from a number of reports we've issued on border security efforts.
So my issue is, and I'm hearing that from my colleagues on both sides, is that while we know we need to do that, we've got to perform those evaluations. We don't have that concrete information. In your opinion, given that, again, unprecedented investments, I'm concerned about whether they're making the difference that we need. Should our next set of funds, assuming they move forward, be contingent upon those assessments, and you can only draw down if you can demonstrate that, in fact, it's going to be a cost-effective investment that also brings about real results at the border?
That would, certainly be a policy call for Congress, but our recommendations have gone to the need for DHS to be able to assess the benefits from its investments and the contributions that those investments are making to its border security efforts.
Okay, because if we don't do that, then the reality is you and I hope, have immigration reform, continue to make sure that we do have secure borders, invest in technology that we'll be using in other places and efforts, and if we don't do it in a contingent, effective manner, then we will not, regardless of the policy decisions that we make here, have an effective environment for protecting and securing the border while making sure that effective trade takes place and legal travel back and forth across the border is not minimized, but is accepted in a productive and safe manner. And I'm based on the testimony today, I am very concerned that we don't have that information readily available to us, and so that minimizes any of the efforts that we make here in Congress. Is that a fair statement? And now anybody can answer. 23 whole seconds. No takers? Come on, Mr. Murphy.
Ma'am, I think we're working very hard to identify our risk. I think we're working very hard, and again, not to beat a dead horse, but our workload staffing model, I think, is helping us identify areas that need additional resources, and basically trying to take more of a business transformational type of look at our processes and how we do business.
All right. It sounds to me like we may not be as ready as we should. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Wyoming, Mrs. Lummis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. To the previous comment by the gentlelady from New Mexico, therein lies the problem. Trying to get us to do comprehensive immigration reform at a time when we cannot assure our constituents, the people we work for, that the border is secure, is a non-starter. When I go home, all I hear about is secure the border first, then we'll talk about comprehensive immigration reform. I hear that from all aspects, from all of my constituents, and I cannot tell them that we have accomplished step one, secure the border, which is their green light to move forward on comprehensive immigration reform. This is not a new condition that the American people, especially those from non-border states, have put on us. They've been telling us for years, secure the border first, then we'll talk about comprehensive immigration reform. There's a bill, probably passed the Senate today, that will comprehensively reform immigration. It is not going to pass the House because we have not addressed the one condition the American people have put on us before they'll allow us to have a robust conversation about comprehensive immigration reform. We haven't secured the border. Now, my constituents have asked me this repeatedly. Is a fence the least expensive, most effective way to secure the border in land-to-land border crossings? Mr. Fisher, is that true?
In some locations, that would be true, yes.
Do we have a fence in every location where that is true?
That I don't know. But also, I should add, it's not just the fence, because anywhere that you would have a fence, which predominantly you would put in places because you have identified it as high risk, which is attributed by a lot of illegal crossings in between the ports of entry, just having the fence in and of itself does not necessarily guarantee the border security.
The Corker Amendment that's being discussed in the Senate, and I don't know whether it's passed or failed, would add 700 miles of fence and 20,000 troops on our border to defend our border. Now, if you were me, and you go home every weekend, and your constituents are telling you, secure the border, would you vote for the Corker Amendment?
Representative, I'm not in a position to, one, put myself in your position, although they're in similar circumstances. When I do go home, my wife and son ask me the same question, and we have a very interesting discussion about that, so I can understand the challenges that you and certainly other members of this committee are looking at right now as it relates to the current legislation.
What do you tell your wife and your child?
I try to change the subject, ma'am.
I'll bet you do. Mr. Murphy?
Sir, ma'am, it's a very important issue.
Okay, let me ask you. The Corker Amendment, 20,000 troops, 700 miles of fence on our southern border. Would you vote for that amendment?
I don't think I could put myself in your position to answer that.
Do you have the same conversation with your family that Mr. Fisher does?
Yes, I do.
And what do you tell them?
I tell them that we have men and women out there doing the best they can with what we have.
Mr. Homan, would you vote for the Corker Amendment if you were me and your constituents every weekend when you went home said, secure the border first, then we'll let you talk about comprehensive immigration reform? Would you vote for the Corker Amendment?
I don't think I'm in a position to, give my opinion on that.
Do you have a family that you discuss these things with?
No, my wife wants me to retire. But as far as my position tonight,